Thank you. Welcome to today's Place and Economic Development Committee meeting. I've got a brief announcement to read out and then we can crack on with the agenda. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Pardon me. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed, and once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking, and if you wouldn't mind switching it off after you've finished, that would be great. Thank you very much. So the first item on the agenda is the appointment of substitutes. Do we have any subs?
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Lamb for Councillor De Serra and Councillor Cochrane for Councillor Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Brilliant, thank you. We don't have any public participation either. And I'll just go through the minutes of the last meeting, a bit of a while ago. So, page 1, any comments? Page 2, Councillor Gregson.
Chair, I declared an interest at the last meeting in relation to the Elgar Festival on item 52, but in part that was erroneous in the sense that it wasn't mentioned in the report, which I'd raised, and also just wanted to use that opportunity to say that we had a successful Elgar Festival this year, the last week, and particularly like to thank the Guildhall staff for their support and assiduous attendance on Saturday, when we had nearly 300 people in the lower hall for a free concert, and it went really well. But we'll share some details of figures and everything, no doubt, at some future juncture.
Thank you, Adrian. Page 3. And finally, page 4. Okay, that's a true record of the meeting then. Thank you very much. We have a brief agenda tonight, only the 3 items. I'm promised that won't happen again. Our meetings will only get longer. Frabjous day. After this meeting is finished, there will be a closed session for a briefing on untidy land and properties for planning enforcement on those 2 topics. So that will be open to all members of the council as well to join us via Teams. So without much further ado then, we will crack on with the agenda. We've got agenda item 1, which is the Q4 and annual performance report.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, councillors. This is our regular report, the final one for this year, and it's pleasing to note that almost all of the indicators are in the green or amber. It's not so pleasing to note that my screen is just frozen. Hang on, bear with me. All right, so yeah, there are only 2 that are actually shown in red, so I'll just mention those as the property enhancement grant spend, which isn't that far away from the actual intended position at this stage, so I don't think that's one that's troubling us very much. And then one which is an annual report, which is employment land completions. We don't actually have the figure for that yet, so it's just showing up as red because we've not yet completed the process. So well, I take it as read that members have seen the information that's presented there, and we'll try and answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, thank you. Mostly because I'm not aware of all of the terminology in this report. So my first question on this, in the supplementary agenda on page 9, it mentions things called Workstream 2 festivals and Workstream 3 participate. What are those things?
through you, Chair. So the CDF project, the Worcester Arches project, was split down into 4 themes. The first was around the construction side of it, so that was the changing the arches and converting those. And then we had 2, one of which was around all the series of festivals that we've had during the course of the project, and we still continue to try and have a light night festival. So that was the whole of that area that was covered under that strand. And then the one in terms of skills and development was a strand which was designed around using the opportunity that funding presented to bring in a number of new people into the creative industries. So it was a piece of work which was done in combination and overseen by the university in supporting that. And it was designed to really try and create, partly to address this question of people leaving Worcester, graduating and leaving, try and keep people in and create a cycle of development around that. And then the 4th was destination management, which was about seeing those arches as a place of destination. And that will find its fulfillment in the next few weeks when the famous chicken shop is knocked down and we finally create that walkway from Foregate Street Station all the way down to the riverside, past the arches along Cherry Tree Walk, and therefore making it a destination for people to come and visit and be part of the sort of cultural centre of the city.
Thank you, it's really useful. Am I okay to ask a couple more questions? Thank you. Again, in the digital copy, on page 25 of this, we talk about planning enforcement cases closed. What actually can we do to improve that, the planning enforcement cases closed?
Through you, Chair, my recommendation would be not to, and the reason for that is that balancing performance-related matters on planning and planning enforcement, it is really important that we don't favour cases that are received and dealt with quickly over more complicated cases that take a lot of effort and determination to close. Dealing with about 1/3 of all cases within 12 weeks of receipt, in my experience, is entirely appropriate in terms of the context of the overall caseload. To explain myself a little bit better, if we, for example, look to increase that to, say, 50 or 60%, the consequence would be that those more complicated cases would suffer, and it's often those cases that we need to prioritise. So it's all about balance. Thank you.
Robert, if I can just add one point, Chair. For newer members of the committee, there is a little bit of legacy, nevertheless, in the reporting where there were an excessive amount of cases sort of open on the system, which could have properly been closed. And our, can I still call you newish head of service? So there's a period of catch-up. So what Duncan's describing is a steady state where necessarily in a busy city there's new cases and how are those managed, but when you see the tracker, some of those large numbers are coming down because there's some legacy stuff that should have been closed off before.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful. I have one more question.
Thank you, Jess.
So on page 26 we talk about retail voids, and I assume that's to do with empty shops. There's not really, I don't really have any context for the data, so it'd be really useful to know how it compares to other cities and sort of what percentage of our shops are empty. Would we be able to know that?
Through you, Chair.
We can provide that for you after the meeting as a written reply.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Tor, I apologise for getting your name wrong. Any more? Oh, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Just really a comment really on the PED key performance indicators relating to city centre footfall, which have risen significantly in the last year. And it's at a time when we've had to put up car park fees, and it hasn't affected the footfall at all by the look of it, which is really good news, I think, that although we've had to increase fees, it hasn't caused a problem which some feared it might. and the trade is doing really well.
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment, really. I'm always reminded that visitors to the city can walk, cycle and drive. So I'm always careful about using the car park income or numbers as a... You're absolutely right. They do, with the number of car parks we have spread across the city, they do act as a reasonable barometer in terms of number of visitors to the city. What we don't know, of course, is how much is being spent in the city. So I suspect that some people are still finding it difficult in terms of the cost of living, and therefore actual retail sales might not be as good as they've been in the past. But the actual number of people in the city is holding up very well. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on for that, talking about the footfall in the city centre, and note that at least part of that increase is because we have a different company, is it, that is monitoring it and using a different methodology to monitor footfall, which is believed to be more accurate. So one question is, is there a brief description of what their methodology is and why is it better than the previous organisation? The second thing is just a comment about parking and footfall, which is that I understand that in other cities there's been a footfall actually can increase when you optimise car parking charges, and I think that our changes did that not just because they were increased, but because people, when you front load the first hour or so of charges, then people will actually leave, and then that leaves a space for another vehicle to come. Whereas if people stay for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, they actually don't do 3, 4 or 5 times as much shopping. So not only footfall increases, but in other cities it's been shown that spend increases if you increase car parking fees such that people come but leave sooner. So that's my comment, but the question was about the methodology and how that has changed.
Same answer as before, unfortunately. I think we would need to provide you with an update after the meeting. I don't have that methodology in front of me at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? Java?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Clearly some excellent work being done across the board in terms of that to maintain a green light and the majority of the items that we're looking at. I'm particularly interested in the Foregate Arches Cultural Development Fund. And since the investment in those arches, have we monitored footfall there and in the increase in maybe business or retail figures along the arches? Or is there a mechanism that we can start to do that once Jack's Chicken Shop is down? Because obviously there's a significant amount of money we've invested as a city and will be investing in the city to make that a destination area. So it kind of warrants a monitoring in terms of evaluation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through you. It was part of the original destination management process to try and understand the people who would be visiting that area. But of course, up until the point where that famous fence was removed, there was very, very little traffic, and you just have to walk down there now to see how many more people are using it. So yes, it would be really good now to take a baseline of the number of people. Well, we could just use that as a trip counter in terms of number of people walking down there. There is a question also for the tenants themselves, because that was part of the work that we're doing with the people who manage the site on our behalf is around marketing the site as a destination. So there is a Facebook page and so on and so forth specifically for that. And part of what they want to do is to actually get people coming along and visiting the premises and engaging in events. So we want to build up that side of that work as well. So yes, now's the time to get a footfall data, but also to start to monitor what activities are happening in there and the events that are taking place things which are designed to actually draw people down to that approach. And then once we're on the other side of the demolition work, we'll then be able to see what the maximum impact of that is. Part of what we have to report back to CDF at the end of the project is a legacy statement, so that will form part of that work as well.
Yeah, thank you. And the point being that actually that project highlights the number of external agencies involved, the number of different departments within the City Council involved in, in terms of cultural bit, in terms of economy, in terms of planning, in terms of that. So it is really crucial that actually we highlight the success of that, and in terms of in terms of footfall, in terms of revenue raised, etc. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, Chair, yes, I mean, we would look to bring the legacy report here when it's finalised.
David.
Just as a positive, I'm told that the scaffolding is going up this week. So Jack's Chicken Shop will be a distant memory at some point, hopefully. Thank you.
A red letter day then. Okay, any further questions about the Q4 and annual report? None? So that we all agreed for the recommendations that the Place and Economic Development notes the Council's Q4 and annual performance for 2023-24. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Right, on to the next agenda item, which is the proposed committee performance scorecard for 24-25. Okay.
This is a continuation of the dialogue which we started before the end of the last municipal year, and when we started to, what we want to do through this process is really try and revitalise the scorecards and make them more closely related to the programme and agenda of the committee. So it's about trying to say, well, what relevant information supports the work of the committee, helps to set the agenda, whereas you decide the things that you're interested in, the projects and the priorities that you have, and then we attempt to provide performance measures which will support progress on those. So trying to make it, rather than just simply repeating quarterly a certain set of data which we've been carrying for potentially for years, but to actually try and tailor it and focus it a little bit. So the approach which emerged from that initial discussion is to keep the two structures. So we've got projects on the one hand, the priorities and things that we want to pay attention to, and performance indicators on the other. So just to deal with the projects first, many of those are following from the continuation of Future High Streets Fund and the UK SPF, which have already been in train for a little while. We've added to that, so the City Centre Transport Action Plan. So before it was the City Centre Transport Strategy, that was to get to the point of actually having a strategy. We've now got that. So this is about how do we take that forward and what the next steps and making sure we're monitoring that. The Towns Fund Communities and Skills one was one which was actually being reported through to Policy and Resources, but it's felt that it's better focus here because that's about developing our assets in our communities, and was also supports the skills and local business of people and skills elements of UK SPF as well. So that's related to that. And the Worcester Play Plan project, so that's moving us on from the development of the Play strategy, which this committee sponsored and managed last year. And well, this will then be on to monitoring progress against each of those. Because those are the new projects for this year. So the Strategic Play Area Development Plan, plan has now been adopted. So it's, as I say, it's about monitoring projects going forward from that. So that's why that one's proposed to be removed. In terms of the KPIs themselves now, so what we're trying to develop here is an approach whereby we continue to have quarterly performance indicators because they're very relevant to this committee and are ones which support quarterly returns and give us a picture of development through the year. And then the others, we would kind of like the idea of doing those on an annual basis. So rather than simply quarterly reporting a PI, but actually present a report annually, which takes into account that performance information and presents it and gives a context to it and tries to discuss some of the actions that have taken place and some actions which will follow. So none of the KPIs which were on the previous scorecard have been removed, except with one right at the bottom there, which is about admissions and commercial income from city museums. And that's, I think, because Philippa's looking to report on the museums in slightly more detail. So there is a new indicator, which is on page 32 of your report, which is it's one right at the bottom, participation in activities and learning at the City Museum. So I think she wants to do more about how are the things, the initiatives, the new things doing, how are they working? So those are coming in as an indicator. But on the whole, the activity at the museums, its income and so on, forms part of an annual report anyway. So, you know, the indicator will just form part of that overall presentation about how we are progressing. So, in summary, all of the KPIs except one, which are in the 23-24 scorecard, are being carried forward. We'll report quarterly on those which are central, primarily those around off-log indicators, and the others which are support the activity. So, for instance, property enhancements, grant spend, which supports the Future High Streets Fund, and those others around market dwellings and affordable dwellings granted because they support, wait for it, the economic development strategy and the South Worcestershire development plan. So those are core indicators for those particular activities. Otherwise, we can expect to see an annual report, not necessarily all at the year end, but at different times during the year, an annual report and each one incorporating the KPIs. That's the plan. We'll see how it works, but that's what's I'm interested to, if there are any views about that, or whether or not there's anything missing from there, other indicators that need to be brought in, any thoughts or comments, and otherwise we'll take that forward. Thank you, Chair.
So open to members for comment. Right. There being, oh, sorry, Jabba. Go on, Jabba.
Thank you, Chair. In your opinion, Chair, do these measures give us a greater level of protection in terms of I suppose, scrutiny and transparency to the general public, or do you think they are not thought out and risk comparing us to other districts which we can't really compare ourselves to, if you see what I'm saying?
So, in my opinion, I think we're giving the same level of scrutiny. I don't think we're losing out on scrutiny here at all. But as far as comparing us to other cities, I'll just bow to David's opinion on that one.
Thank you, through you, Chair. That's working, isn't it? I've just got a different sign on my, right, okay. If I can just backtrack slightly to the conversation that I've been having with the group leaders. I think, just to put this into context, we've got a mix of measures here. We've got project management measures in terms of milestones, which demonstrate how we are progressing with our projects, quite obviously. We've got process measures. So, for example, how quickly are we dealing with planning applications, for example? I'm not picking that one out for any particular reason, other than it's doing very well. And then we've got what I would call city performance measures in terms of how the place is doing, such as footfall and things like that. And one of the things we've been talking about is how first of all, we put this, as officers, put this better in front of members in terms of, so members can determine what matters most to them, and we then end up measuring the right things from a member's perspective, and also how we can have a more structured framework of how these measures are presented. Because at the moment, if you look through the template, those performance measures, those milestones and those city performance indicators are in a bit of a mix. So I think we need to clarify that. In terms of how we compare with others, we've had a discussion around the off-log measures, for example, which is for those of you that are not in that loop, the Office of Local Government is a recently established body. It's not independent of the department, of the DLUC, but it's are supposed to be running alongside effectively. So Oflog produce public performance indicators, and if you go onto the Oflog website, you will see how we compare with nearest neighbours, and those nearest neighbours are not literally those that are adjacent to us geographically. It's those local authorities that have similar characteristics and attributes to us as a small urban council. So there are those other measures as well, but I think you're right. We do need to think about benchmarking as well as just producing measures in isolation. So one of the things that we've talked about again as officers and group leaders is we have a plan for a governance review, and I think we've all agreed that the setting out our stall in terms of performance measurement should be part of that process, not the establishment of the individual indicators per se, but how we go about measuring our performance, whether it's through benchmarking, target setting, or looking at the performance of the city as a whole, as a place. So I think that's the sort of answer to that in terms of benchmarking and part of the governance review. Thank you.
Jabba.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for that answer. And I think the point I was heading towards was, which I think you alluded to, is that actually it gives a greater confidence to the general public and to our residents that actually there is a cohesive, understandable set of measures that they can look at and understand how we are performing against that. And with the changes that are coming, with the changes that we are now implementing, that we've got the right measures for people to look at in order for them to be able to assess. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabba. Anybody else?
The Strategic Play Area Development Plan, I understand that's being removed when we're looking at KPIs and us monitoring from a project perspective. The Strategic Play Plan describes short-term 1 to 2 year plan and a medium-term plan. I'm just seeking reassurance. Do they exist? And because they're kind of the missing link between removing the strategy as a KPI and going forward as a project. Where do they exist? Who do they sit with?
Thank you, Sharon.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a very fair point, actually. We've got 2 reports on play coming together in the next PED meeting, and it would be good to then talk as a group about what sort of gap that creates in terms of oversight. I think that's a really fair question. We did talk about setting out a delivery plan. This is meant to be something like a 10-year programme of investment. But any time you write down a delivery plan, it then changes immediately that there's a Section 106 opportunity or whatever. So I think it's very fair to say, where's the visibility of the longer term? I suppose what I'd suggest is, if we could see how much of that officers we think we can present in time for July, I think that will identify what the gap is. It may well be that you want something like we do with the EDI strategy, that annually we're reporting on where we are overall. That could be a way of tackling that. That goes back to the point about performance measures. We've always sort of said, haven't we, how do we know our strategies are delivering? At some point you need to measure the outcomes. So I think we'll definitely take that on board.
And I was conscious of that and very, very clearly wanted play to remain on the agenda in some way, shape or form. So I'm quite happy with the KPIs that we've declared right now. That doesn't stop us from adding new performance counters towards the end of this year. So thank you for that. Does anybody else have any points they want to make about this report? There being none, and that this is a decision, recommendation is that the Place and Economic Development Committee approve the proposed content of the committee performance scorecard for 2024-25. All those in favour, please give me an indication. I think that's unanimous. I don't think I need to ask for noes or abstainers. Right, brilliant, thank you. That was agreed. Thank you, officers. On to the air quality supplementary planning document, the last item on this agenda, and I believe we're going to get a presentation from Hannah. Those of you who attended the briefing will remember some of these slides.
So there were supposed to be slides, but unfortunately we haven't got them. So I will just talk you through the proposals in front of you. So the draft air quality SPD has been in development for a number of years. And officers from, obviously, Worcester City Council have been working with our counterparts at Malvern Hills and Wychavon District Councils to prepare this document together. We've also worked alongside our colleagues at Worcestershire County Council and obviously Worcestershire Regulatory Services to inform the document and the production of the document. We are now in a position whereby we have a draft of the document that is ready to go out to consultation, and we are here tonight to seek authorisation to do that. The document will be taken to relevant committees at Malvern and Wychavon later in June. We are the first to also seek that authorisation to go out to consult. Although each council will separately, when we get there, separately adopt the plan, it has been prepared by the three councils together and will be the same document when we get to that point of adoption. So once the SPD has been adopted, it will help to guide decision making on applications. However, it doesn't create policy. That is the job of the local development plan, in this case the South Worcestershire Development Plan, as is adopted. The SPD is supplementary, as the name suggests, to policies and needs to hang off of a policy within the plan. So that needs to create the framework first. In this case, that is SWDP 31, which deals with pollution and land stability. The SPD then goes on to guide how that policy is implemented and how it helps applicants when dealing with this issue. Therefore, the SPD is limited in scope. It cannot go above and beyond the policy that it links to. So policy, as I've mentioned, SWDP 31 deals with land pollution and land stability. And just Part A of the policy states that development proposals must be designed in order to avoid any significant adverse impacts from pollution, including cumulative ones, on any of the following. And there are a number of bullet points, but the last one relating to this is an air quality management area. In 2019, the entirety of Worcester City Council was designated an air quality management area. And this was due to nitrogen dioxide levels being in exceedance of what is considered acceptable. Therefore, policy SWDP 31 would relate to the entirety of Worcester City Council area. This means that the council must produce an area action plan to relate to the air quality management area, and those of you on Environment Committee will be aware of this. It is currently being reviewed, and one of the recommended actions arising from that action plan is to produce an air quality SPD. Poor air quality can have a huge impact on health of people and also of the environment. Vulnerable people in particular are very susceptible to the impact of poor air quality, and this is especially with conditions such as asthma, amongst others. Furthermore, sources of air pollution that lead to poor air quality are often also contributors towards climate change. So dealing with air quality can also help with dealing with that. The main sources of air pollution, and in this case nitrogen dioxide is our main concern, is primarily from road transport. Nationally, nitrogen dioxide levels do appear to be reducing. This has been due to the influence of technology, such as going over towards electronic vehicles, but also generally changes in behaviour as people become more aware of these issues. However, it is still considered that the levels exceed what is acceptable. Another pollutant of concern is that of particulate matter, which mainly originates from residential uses of combustible fuels, such as having a wood-burning stove. So how can development have a negative impact on air quality? There are three very big culprits. These are increased population through use of potentially air polluting emitting transport, as I've said, increased population using combustible fuels, such as having a wood-burning stove, but also having gas central heating, and also the intensification of land use and reduction of green space in areas can have a negative impact, as green spaces help to combat the effects of air pollution. Poor air quality can also impact on new developments, so the other way around. Consideration should also be given to the sensitivity of development or its future users to poor air quality. So, as I've already mentioned, the impact on human health from poor air quality means that potentially there could be greater stresses on the NHS and also could lead to a greater social care bill. And could lead to a greater proportion of the population being off work through illnesses being caused or exacerbated by poor air quality. Also, as people become more aware of this issue, it could lead to an impact on viability of development, with potentially locations that are identified as having poor air quality being seen as less desirable to live or work. So these are the main reasons why we need to address, or do all we can to address, poor air quality. But the planning system can only do so much and is one part of a much bigger picture. As I mentioned, this SPD can only go so far to help address poor air quality issues, and it needs to be aligned with that policy that I've already mentioned. The SPD has aims within it. These are mainly trying to uphold the policy, to supplement and support the policy, and also provide transparency and consistency in its implementation. The aims are supported by objectives. These are also covered in the SPD itself, and these look, these look to promote the consideration of air quality and associated health and environmental impacts through the planning process, provide a consistent approach to the consideration and assessment of air quality across the South Worcestershire councils, complement existing technical guidance that we have from Worcestershire Regulatory Services and really points to that also, and also hopefully to ensure that new developments do not have a detrimental impact on air quality. So the SPD sets out a bit of a toolkit approach to for planning applications and also for planning officers and decision makers when considering air quality. There is a planning officer's checklist which can be used really to determine whether air quality needs to be looked at in greater detail. It's a bit of a sieving exercise. So it looks first at the proposals and whether the planning officer would want to engage with Worcestershire Regulatory Services to get further advice on those proposals. There's a technical guidance document which provides advice to applicants and whether they would need to have an air quality assessment undertaken to support their proposals through their application. And finally, there is a code of best practice. This goes wider than just air quality. It's a code of best practice that looks at managing disruption with associated demolition and construction, but it does cover air quality also. Finally, we would really advise that early pre-application discussions are undertaken to gain some of this advice early on so that it can be dealt with effectively through the planning process. So the SPD really provides 3 elements of information. The first I've already covered in that background information, which deals with the impact of poor air quality, both on people and the environment. The second gives suggested ways of mitigating against the impact on air quality, and I'll cover that a little bit in a second. Due to the nature of development, we're all aware each development proposal, it will be very specific to itself. It will have a very specific set of circumstances. So there's really no one-size-fits-all form of mitigation. Therefore, it is only suggested ways of mitigating against potential impacts. Finally, the SPD gives greater advice to applicants on when an air quality assessment would be needed, and what is needed to support and go into that impact assessment. Within the SPD, you'll see that there is a table that sets out examples of when air quality would need to be considered further according to what is being proposed. There are references to circumstances both inside and outside of an air quality management area. So that's just a reminder that this will cover the 3 councils rather than just Worcester, which is completely within an air quality management area. We also want to consider cumulative impacts. It may be that there is a proposal that doesn't meet what's in that table to suggest air quality is needed to be considered further. However, it may be that there are a number of proposals in that area and that cumulative impact may need to be considered. Air quality assessments are needed if the site is located within the air quality management area or near to it, and also where development would result in likely increase in emissions from road traffic or other sources of pollutants. Where an air quality assessment indicates that a development will cause significant detrimental impact or result in exposure to pollutant concentrations that exceed national levels or accepted levels, it is required that adequate and satisfactory mitigation measures are secured through the planning application process. As part of any pre-application discussions, it should be determined whether an air quality assessment would be needed, so the applicant knows upfront what they need to do. The SPD then goes on to give examples of what types of proposals require an air quality impact assessment. Air quality assessments will be technical documents. They will need to be informed by data provided by both nationally and locally. They will need to include data on traffic counts and predictions, point source pollution data, verified computer-generated air quality impact models, and for that we would be looking at both a best case and a worst case scenario to fully understand what the potential impacts of the development would be, and also then to identify an approach to mitigation. There is a bit of a hierarchy set out in the SPD with regards to mitigating against the impact. First of all, we would primarily like to see any impact prevented, so stopped in its tracks. If that's not possible, we would look for impact to be reduced, then look to mitigation, and if all else fails, we would then be potentially looking at off-site and offsetting the impact in a different location. As I mentioned, there are a number of recommendations throughout the document as to what mitigation measures could be taken and what they may look like. Some of these are mainly looking at design principles for the site, and that would include the layout of the site, so looking at putting buildings further away from main roads, for example, looking at the location of windows and ventilation units, and that also goes on to include where green space is located if the site is big enough to provide that green space as well. Particularly sensitive buildings such as hospitals, schools, nurseries, care facilities and children's playgrounds are more likely to be used by vulnerable people that are susceptible to the impacts of air quality. So it's really important these are very carefully considered. Other potential sources of mitigation are looked at through the use of the planning system. So as I've mentioned, early interaction through pre-app discussions, and also looking at health impact assessments and any outcomes of those and taking those recommendations on board. And also looking at location of sites. If a site, for example, is closely connected to public transport or active transport networks, then the people are more likely to use those, thereby reducing pollutions being emitted. So the reason we're all here tonight, the draft SPD is now ready to be considered. We would look to align the consultation with the consultation on the Air Quality Management Action Plan, going out at the beginning of July. This would obviously be post-general elections. Although that could be considered confusing for members of the public, the two are very closely linked, as I've mentioned. So we would look to just manage that, to make it very clear what each consultation is on, even potentially using different consultation platforms online to try and make that as easy as possible. And we would look to go out to consultation for 6 weeks, because obviously we may be entering into holiday season, so give people that little bit longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I think you've refreshed my memory on a couple of points as well, and I attended the briefing, and Kat. So thank you for that. I'll just leave it to members to raise any questions. Tor and then Steve, thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment and a very small question. Just to say thank you for this document. It's really an important document. I was really shocked to see that in England, between 26,000 and 38,000 deaths a year are caused by air pollution, and that many more suffer from chronic ill health issues because of our air quality. So it's really important that we do something about this. My very small question is, in part of the mitigation section, it mentions consideration for shared mobility options such as mobility hubs and car clubs. What is a mobility hub?
So a mobility hub is really that sort of hub whereby you can change transport modes. I think the phrases are quite often interchangeable with transport hubs, but it is with a focus on making sure that all transport modes are accessible to all members of the public, no matter what their mobility is. So I think they are slightly interchangeable with the phrase transport hubs.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just as Tor said, a very important step forward to have this document. I can't help, though, but feel like it's closing the door after the horse has bolted, because my feeling is that SWDP to date is likely to have had significant impacts on air quality in Worcester, given that Malvern District Council have managed to push the development of housing within their area but onto the outskirts of Worcester, and which even have managed to have warehousing put on the edge of Worcester but within their catchment for business rates, increasing traffic along the Southern Link Road and inevitably within Worcester City. There are so many concerns about SWDP, and as I say, I think that it's an important step, but I have concerns about this. One, perhaps I'll just start with a straightforward question, I hope, which is that it seems quite specific that the area quality management area is designated because of nitrogen dioxide, which, as time goes forward, will inevitably be less of an issue because of electrification of transport and not many people burning solid fuels in their homes. And PM 2.5 is going to be increasingly a major problem. And it seems that this is specific to meet the legislation around nitrogen dioxide. So if the levels in Worcester improve, will the designation of Worcester being an air quality management area be removed, even though PM 2.5 might be increasing? That's my first question.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, particulate matter is also considered with air quality management areas. Although the Worcester City Air Quality Management Area was designated for nitrogen dioxide, Worcestershire Regulatory Services do actively monitor other pollutants in the atmosphere throughout the area. Obviously, that's a very technical part, and that is something that they undertake rather than ourselves. So as I understand it, when these things are reviewed, other pollutants are also considered, and whether that needs to be considered and addressed through an air quality management area.
So can I just follow up with that, Cody? Sorry.
Through you, Chair. I thought it might just be helpful to add that we fully anticipate that we would have to review this SPD and update it in light of the adoption of the SWDP review, because as Hannah explained earlier, this SPD hangs off a policy in an adopted plan that was adopted in 2016. That's the way the legislation works. We can't do anything about that, but it's about trying to do as much as we possibly can now, but a review and a refresh so that we have an SPD that hangs off a policy in the SWDP review in a couple of years' time, but essentially once the SWDP review has been through the examination process and then that plan has been adopted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to echo that point, it is on this committee to push that piece of work through. So yeah, we'll be on it.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, air pollution is such an important issue, and as mentioned by yourself in the report, it's a social issue because we know that the poor segments of our society are disproportionately affected by pollution, and my concern is that whether this gives enough teeth to control unscrupulous developers to prevent that actually escalating. So my example with that would be the development along the Southern Link Road that if you like, the social housing that the developers are building is right next to the Southern Link Road, right by the roundabout, where those people are likely to be more exposed to air pollutants than the lovely housing which is set back from the road and behind green space and so on. And it strikes me that that looks obviously deliberate, that the developer has put the social housing right by the road and kept the non-social housing away from the road. Will this give us any teeth to prevent that kind of thing happening in the future?
Thank you. What the SPD will do is, once adopted by the three councils, it will add weight to the recommendations from Worcestershire Regulatory Services on how to address the impacts on air quality, both on development and from development. So it will add weight to existing guidance on how to address those things. That means that it should add teeth, yes. But like I've said, it is limited in scope. It cannot go beyond the current policy. And that policy is really the framework in which we need to work. So it's really about offering that advice to applicants, offering that advice to the decision makers, and pointing in the right direction of that sort of mitigation. As Duncan has mentioned, we will review this once the review of the SWDP has been adopted, which, as submitted, has a more impactful policy on air quality than our currently adopted plan does.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Hannah. Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Rias. Councillor Kimberley and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Hannah and her team for this piece of work. It's incredibly detailed, and for the time that your team have taken to explain this to us. This is my third time looking at it, and I look forward to looking again tomorrow. I think this really highlights that the whole of the city has been an air quality management area since 2019. I'm acutely aware of that. And it just really highlights how much the County Council have dragged their heels. If they put more cycle lanes in, if they'd electrified buses, we would be in a very different situation to we are now. And I think it's important that in this meeting we acknowledge the failings of the County Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Hannah. Again, thank you, Chair. That's a point well made, Hannah Cooper. A couple of different points, if I may, Chair. Do we have any data of how many deaths there have been in Worcester or Worcestershire through air quality? That's number one. Second is in terms of the, in layman's terms, if Duncan can spell out what this means to an ordinary man and woman building an extension on the side of their house, and to a developer, so we get an understanding of where this policy takes effect, if you see what I'm saying. And then the third element of it is, obviously these air quality measures that we're going to implement will add a cost, obviously, to the developer in terms of that. That will then have, most likely, that cost will then be passed on to those purchasing the property. And if we're trying to mitigate the affordability of homes, and in that, how do we manage that scenario?
Through you, Chair. The intended approach is to be very proportionate and fair in terms of the scale of development that we're looking at. So through the SPD, the requirements for householder type development would be quite limited. And with the rising cost of living, the expense of extending a home, we need to make sure that we're not introducing something that simply makes that unviable, because increasingly people can't afford to move house. Their best option is to extend and stay put, and we wouldn't want to upset that fine balance. But there are still things that householders can do. But more so, it's about medium to larger developments where we can influence the type of heating systems. So it might be that rather than gas-fired boilers, central heating, that we're encouraging people to use air source heat pumps or ground source heating. And as that becomes more popular, it becomes more affordable, both for individual house builders, but also some of the volume house builders as well. And we're already seeing that. So this is building on what we've already been doing. But as the SPD explains, there are other measures, like thinking more carefully about the soft landscaping that we put in. And it's amazing how simple things like choosing species of tree and ground level planting that has sticky leaves can significantly improve air quality. And by encouraging a package of measures, we can make a really positive impact on air quality. Just to pick up one point, if I may, Worcestershire Regulatory Services have a number of best practice guidance notes, and as planners, we're working with WRS to influence applicants and developers to increase the performance of their developments in terms of air quality. But those technical notes don't have the same weight as a supplementary planning document which hangs off our development plan. So that's where the value comes from producing an SPD like this, consulting on it, and then adopting it. Thank you, Chair.
Happy? Edward?
First of all, I want to say as a new councillor, this is the best report I have yet read. Admittedly, it's not a large sample, but thank you. I wanted to ask a quick technical question and then put in a comment. First of all, I was just intrigued by the term street canyon environments. Obviously, that brings up an immediate picture, but is there a specific definition I could look up for how this is being classified under this plan? Apologies if that's a bit technical. The other thing I wanted to throw in there, sort of following on from a comment from Steve earlier, obviously it is the case that a lot of the communities living in the vicinity of air pollution sources are very deprived, and in my experience, a lot of those deprived communities are not necessarily as able to access the internet or internet-based consultation. Is there some thought that could be added into the plan to make sure that any consultation reaches those residents who are in the target area but perhaps not online? Thank you.
Okay. Through you, Chair, just to pick up on the first question, I think what we're trying to achieve through the SPD is something which covers all types of developments across both urban and rural areas, because we're producing this for South Worcestershire, not just for Worcester City. The term canyon is intended to be a catch-all. Typically, where you have a narrow road with tall buildings each side, and the key is that you've probably got stationary traffic waiting at traffic lights, engine running, because these days not all cars have stop-start technology. You're concentrating that negative impact, and it's those particular hotspots that we're trying to tackle most. Thank you.
Chair, just in terms of that point about accessibility of the consultation, it is a perennial challenge. And when we have tried in recent years to undertake more accessible consultations, we haven't necessarily seen the uptake we would like. You can go to the extremes of door knocking, but again, that's not always well received, and it is quite a busy time in terms of lots of other door knocking opportunities. I think that what we've got to do is make sure that we've made our consultation information accessible, plain English, straightforward. We always put copies in 89 High Street. If councillors wish to collect copies, we put copies in community centres. That's our usual approach. Very happy to take feedback on that, but it is hard to identify a single action or measure we could take differently in terms of consultation, you know, off the top of my head, really, based on our previous experience.
Thank you, Sian. No, you're okay, Matt. Thank you. Any further questions from anybody? That's great then. So the recommendations are that this committee approves the draft air quality supplementary planning document as set out in the background Appendix 1 for a 6-week public consultation. Authorises the Corporate Director, Planning and Governance, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Place and Economic Development Committee, to make any necessary minor amendments to the draft air quality supplementary planning document prior to publication. And finally, subject to the outcome of the public consultation, raising no significant material considerations requiring substantial amendments to the draft SPD, authorise the Corporate Director, Planning and Governance, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Place and Economic Development Committee, to make any necessary minor amendments and refer the draft SPD to Council for adoption. So those are the recommendations. Are we happy to accept them? Thank you, Jabba. I think that was fairly unanimous, not anonymous. Right. There has been no other business asked for, so that brings this meeting to an end. We have a 10-minute break before the closed session starts. Thank you very much, everybody.